and welcome to the forum on UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and China's experience in poverty reduction. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals aspire to eradicate poverty for all and bring peace and prosperity. With less than 10 years to go, how are countries doing? And what will be the role of the United Nations? At this forum, we call for cooperation for transformation, collaboration on poverty reduction, and commitment to international development. We are here to share ideas about poverty reduction, and also we are here to find a way forward together. So I'm glad on behalf of our organizers to welcome all of you who are joining us here in the studio and online from all over the world. And I'm glad to announce here, this event is hosted by CGTN think tank and co-hosted by the Carter Center, the Schiller Institute, the Bridge Tank, the China EU, the South African Institute of International Affairs, the Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute, and the Russian-Chinese Analytical Center. First, let's put our hands together and warmly welcome Mr. Shen Haisheng, President and Editor-in-Chief of China Media Group.
尊敬的各位嘉宾、各位朋友、女士们、先生们，今天的这场研讨堪称风云际会，我们相会于云端，更有新的意蕴。首先，我谨代表会议的主办方中国中央广播电视总台，对海内外嘉宾的出席表示诚挚的欢迎。中国国家主席习近平指出，消除贫困自古以来就是人类梦寐以求的理想，是各国人民追求幸福生活的基本权利。中共18大以来，以习近平同志为核心的中共中央带领全党全国人民全面打响脱贫攻坚战，在实现全面建成小康社会的道路上奋力奔跑。中国贫困人口已经连续7年每年减贫1000万人以上，脱贫攻坚力度之大、规模之广、影响之深，前所未有，创造了人类减贫史上的一大奇迹。中国改革开放40多年来，中国人人均收入增长超过25倍，让8.5亿人摆脱了贫困，对世界减贫贡献率超过70%，成为全球最早实现联合国千年发展目标中减贫目标的发展中国家，为世界减贫事业提供了中国方案和中国智慧，极大地增强了全世界消除绝对贫困、实现联合国2030年可持续发展目标的信心和决心。全球减贫事业的健康发展，媒体发挥着至关重要的作用，在信息发布、分享经验、促进交流、凝聚共识的过程中，扮演着十分关键的角色。作为当今世界体量规模最大、业务形态最多、覆盖范围最广的综合性国际传媒集团，中央广播电视总台以打造具有强大引领力、传播力、影响力的国际一流新兴主流媒体为目标，充分发挥多语种、多平台、多渠道的融合传播优势，积极履行媒体责任，为全球减贫事业贡献力量。我们生动记录中国的脱贫攻坚创举，开展走向我们的小康生活大型主题采访活动。总台记者有上百人次深入到大山、荒野、扶贫一线，开展采访报道，深入捕捉平凡人的奋斗故事，打造了决战脱贫在今朝、摆脱贫困、人民的小康等一批精品力作。我们创新媒体参与精准扶贫的模式，实施广告精准扶贫公益扶助项目，利用总台广告资源，帮扶22个省区市，推广130多种农副产品，投入屏幕的时间超过了10万分钟，投入资源市场的价值达到了 68亿元人民币，覆盖超过410个贫困县，受益贫困户达到了350多万户，1300万人。我们扎实传播中国的减贫经验。总台 CGTN 连续4年推出大型扶贫融媒体直播报道《最后1公里》英文纪录片《中国脱贫攻坚》，引发海外观众的广泛关注，向世界展现、分享中国减贫事业的成效经验。我们推出“外眼看扶贫”系列评论微视频，邀请外国专家学者到中国脱贫攻坚一线实地探访，亲身体验中国的扶贫故事，传播中国的扶贫经验，进一步促进交流，凝聚共识。当前新冠肺炎疫情仍在全球蔓延，世界减贫事业正经历着严峻的考验。艰难之时更显真情，人类比以往任何时候都更需要加强国际合作，更需要我们同舟共济、齐心协力、团结应对，凝聚起战胜疫情的强大合力，携手共建一个没有贫困、共同发展、共享繁荣的人类命运共同体。相信通过这次线上的研讨，一定会碰撞出更多的智慧思考和真知灼见。期待各位嘉宾的精彩发言。最后，预祝本次会议圆满成功，谢谢大家。
Thank you, Mr. Shen Haixiong. Now let's welcome Mr. Huang Kunming, member of the Political Bureau, Secretary of the Secretariat, and Minister of the Publicity Department of the CPC Central Committee.
女士们、先生们、朋友们，历史总是在一些特殊的年份，给人们以极其智慧、继续前行的力量。2020年无疑是这样一个特殊的年份。75年前，联合国在人类命运的重要关口上成立，为维护人类和平、促进全球发展发挥了不可或缺的作用。75年后，国际局势正在发生重大、深刻的变化。新冠肺炎疫情等多重的挑战，给世界带来剧烈的冲击。面对复杂严峻的形势，各国以团结之力，携手应对全球性挑战，实现共同发展，才是唯一正确的选择。正是本着这样的良好的愿望和期待，今天我们相聚云端，分享全球减贫的实践经验，探讨人类可持续发展的目标路径。这对于坚定经济复苏的增长的信心和决心，落实联合国2030年可持续发展目标，具有积极意义。消除贫困是全人类的共同理想，也是中国政府与国际社会矢志不渝的奋斗目标。在推进全球减贫的进程当中，联合国扮演着不可替代的重要角色。长期以来联合国开发计划署、粮农组织等机构发挥独特的资源优势，实施一系列减贫项目，积极帮助广大发展中国家摆脱贫困，为全球减贫事业做出了重要贡献。在此过程当中，中国 作为最大的发展中国家，也得到了联合国及相关国际组织和有关国家的真诚帮助。中国人民始终铭记在心。长期以来，中国党和政府一直把带领广大人民摆脱贫困、过上好日子作为治国理政的首要目标。改革开放40多年来，中国7亿多人口摆脱贫困，对世界减贫贡献超过70%。特别是中共18大以来，习近平主席牢牢把握人民群众对美好生活的向往，带领全党全国人民全面打响脱贫攻坚战。近8年来，中国贫困人口从2012年底的9899万人，减少到2019年底的551万人，贫困发生率从10.2%降至0.6%，连续7年年均减贫1000万人以上。今年，中国将在现行标准下消除绝对贫困，实现全面建成小康社会的奋斗目标，也将提前实现联合国2030年可持续发展议程的减贫目标。这是对全球减贫事业做出的重要贡献。在与贫困做斗争的历史进程当中，我们深切地感到，生存权和发展权是首要的基本人权。没有保障生存发展的基本条件，再好的社会理想都是空中楼阁。深切感到，减贫事业是崇高追求，更是务实行动，必须立足各自的国情，全社会共同参与，不断探索科学、精准、有效的扶贫方略。深切地感到，消除贫困是人类社会的共同目标，必须坚持相互尊重、公平正义、合作共赢、建设性参与饥饿、难民、疾病等等全球性问题的解决，从制度上、根源上消除贫困滋生的土壤。女士们、先生们、朋友们，今年是联合国2030年可持续发展目标行动10年计划的初始之年。世界正面临经济、政治、公共卫生等多方面的挑战。在这个紧要关头，中国愿与世界各国一道，秉持人类命运共同体的理念，加大合作与行动力度，携手推进国际减贫进程，合力建设远离贫困、共同繁荣的美好世界。第一，坚持合作抗疫，携手共克时艰。疫情已经成为全球减贫事业 最现实、最紧迫的挑战。抗击疫情，与消除贫困一样，都需要更多的团结，更多的合作。国际社会应当坚定维护多边主义，反对一切形式的单边主义和保护主义，最大程度地凝聚起全球合力，共同捍卫全球公共卫生体系，守护人类生命健康。经过艰苦努力，中国夺取了全国抗疫斗争重大战略成果，愿意继续推进疫情防控的国际合作，同国际社会一道，打赢全球抗疫阻击战，共创更加美好的明天。第二，坚持发展导向，增进民众福祉。发展是解决贫困问题的根本之道。我们应以开启行动10年计划为契机，将联合国可持续发展议程与本国发展战略深入对接，坚持人民至上、生命至上，统筹经济社会发展，加大民生领域投入，聚焦发展中国家面临的困难挑战，重点落实消除饥饿、卫生、教育、就业等领域的发展目标，切实保障和提升民众的福祉。第三，坚持互利共赢，汇聚减贫合力。经济全球化是历史大势，是世界各国共同繁荣持久发展的重大机遇。国际社会应该加强协调合作，共同维护自由贸易和多边贸易体制，保障全球产业链、供应链稳定，有力提振信心，稳定预期。应继续强化以南北合作为主渠道，南南合作为补充的国际发展合作，将减贫作为国际合作优先的领域，让合作成果惠及更多的国家和民众。女士们、先生们、朋友们，中华文化历来有扶危济困的传统，有投桃报李的美德。我们珍视党领导人民脱贫攻坚的宝贵成果，更不会忘记脱贫路上国际社会给予的真诚的支持和帮助。中国将一如既往地致力于为国际减贫事业做出应有的贡献。我们坚信，只要各国人民同舟共济，命运与共，人类终将迎来一个没有贫困和没有饥饿的世界。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Mr. Huang Kunming. Contributing to our event today, there's also a group of distinguished international speakers. They are bringing their important messages to contribute to this idea. First, let's have the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Distinguished CGTN think tank on UN 75 participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to deliver these video remarks on the occasion of the CGTN think tank panel on UN 75. As the world collectively celebrates the landmark 75th anniversary of the United Nations, I am confident that this timely panel and the insights of its eminent speakers will go a long way in helping to catalyze action in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is indispensable, as we now have just 10 years until the SDGs 2030 target date to fulfill their vision of eradicating poverty in all its forms and leaving no one behind. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the international community, guided by the pioneering United Nations Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, has vitally improved human development around the world. Extreme poverty rates have been cut in half by 2010. This historic achievement represents over 1 billion people, and China's extraordinary national development and success in implementing the UN's Millennium Development Goals was integral to these global gains. Indeed, between 1990 and 2005, over 470 million Chinese people were lifted out of extreme poverty and hunger. But there is still much work to be done. Today, nearly 10% of the world's workers and their families still live on less than $1.90, 13 yuan a day. And 821 million people in the world are still undernourished and living in hunger. Thankfully, we have a global blueprint to better this situation. The 2030 Agenda and its SDGs is one of the UN's most significant achievements and one of my proudest personal achievements as Secretary General of the United Nations. And I firmly believe that achieving the SDGs can help bring us together in this era of expanding pandemics, uncertainty, and division, while simultaneously paving the path to greater sustainability, security, and prosperity. However, in order to achieve this vision, international cooperation, innovation, and engagement by all stakeholders in all regions are essential in the next decade. With your elevated efforts to this end, alongside China's continued multilateral leadership, I do believe we can still achieve the SDGs, succeed in eradicating poverty, and forge a world that is more sustainable, prosperous, and harmonious for all. I thank you. 谢谢.
Thank you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Next, Mr. Liu Zhenmin, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Nations, I'm pleased to join you in this global conversation on the future of humanity, the Sustainable Development Goals, and poverty reduction. I thank CGTN for hosting this event, which is an important contribution to galvanize the United Nations Decade of Action to deliver the SDGs by 2030. The world was already off track in achieving the 2030 Agenda before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The global efforts were not commensurate with what is required for achieving the goals. Now, more and more people are falling further behind due to the pandemic. Poverty is expected to rise everywhere for the first time since 1990 as a result of the current global crisis. About 71 million people are estimated to be pushed back into extreme poverty in 2020. Many are informal sector workers whose incomes dropped by 60% in the first month of the pandemic. More than 1.6 billion students are out of school, erasing the modest progress made in recent years. Although the pandemic has impacted all countries and communities, its impact has been felt more acutely by vulnerable groups and populations. Informal sector workers, elder people, children, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, migrants and refugees are some who have been hit the hardest. It also taking a toll on young people, women and girls. It is critical that recovery efforts address the underlying causes of poverty and inequality and promote meaningful inclusion of these groups by addressing their specific needs. Distinguished participants, the world needs a fundamental rethinking of policies and a coordinated and comprehensive global response and recovery effort based on reliable data and science and guided by the SDGs. Health systems must be urgently strengthened in countries that are at greatest risk. Thus, targeting investments in universal health system, health care, as well as education and social protection measures are key. Also, limited access to digital technologies remains a major driver of inequality and poverty. Affordable connectivity is therefore crucial in times of physical and social distancing. A large-scale multilateral response is needed to ensure that developing countries have the resources they need to protect households and businesses. Recovery packages can facilitate the shift to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy and support universal access to quality public services. And it is critical to ensure that statistical organizations have the tools and the resources to facilitate timely and smart decision-making. Distinguished participants, my department, UNDESA, continues to strengthen and raise the profile of research and data to accelerate global actions for a world without poverty. We are monitoring and analyzing global trends that have a bearing on poverty eradication, inequality, jobs, and social inclusion, particularly among social groups. Let us together strengthen our collaboration and stay focused on SDGs, recover better, and accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liu Zhenmin. Up next, Yves Leterme, who is the former Prime Minister of Belgium.
Dear participants, the 75th anniversary of the UN system is of course a very good reason to celebrate. To celebrate and to gratefully look back at what was made possible, starting from San Francisco, starting from this big achievement, this great achievement of putting in place a global multilateral framework, a framework to peacefully settle differences and to promote human development in all domains. Since 1945, a lot has been happening and a lot has been achieved thanks to the UN system. And we would take it for granted. But let's not forget that the United Nations are only the third attempt in the history of mankind to set up an inclusive, multilateral, global organization. And during 75 years, we have experienced what the positive impact of this is. But of course, an anniversary is not only a moment to look back, it's also a moment to think about the challenges of today and tomorrow, to look at present times and to see in the mid and long term what are the main challenges and how to address them. And I think we have a consensus worldwide that the main challenges, the most important challenges of these times, the times we live in, that these are global, that these are linked also to the open borders, and who says global challenges also, of course, logically has to say global answers. Indeed, global challenges need global answers. And so this means that also for the next decades, of course, the United Nations are a crucial setup, that the role of the United Nations as an inclusive global multilateral organization is key. But as said before, we should not take it for granted. We have to work to strengthen the United Nations, to improve its functioning, and to make it possible that in all domains, through international cooperation, we achieve progress. In terms of strengthening the system, we have, for instance, to work, and of course not only to work and to debate, but also to take decisive steps in improving the legitimacy of decision-making. It has been said earlier, and a lot of debate has been going on. But indeed, today it is time to decide, to change the way, for instance, crucial decision-making bodies like the UN Security Council are composed. It is really not logical that in the UN Security Council, amongst the permanent members, that a continent like Africa, a subcontinent like Latin America, that very powerful nations like Germany, Japan, India are even not represented around the table. Let's be on the one hand creative, but also show courage in changing the rules so that we really can have an inclusive decision-making, promoting peace, keeping all tools in place to make human development even more effectively and more efficient. Even more important is, of course, the agenda, the content-related action of the United Nations and its agencies. And there we have a roadmap, we have an agenda. Indeed, some years ago, we reached an agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals of the next 15 years. This was based on the good experience under the leadership of Kofi Annan, the good achievements in the field of the Millennium Development Goals, where indeed, let's be honest, thanks also to a very important part, thanks to the successes of the Chinese leadership in promoting human development in China, in making socio-economic progress in China, where thanks to that, we also at the global stage managed to reach most of the Millennium Development Goals. We have to continue our efforts and even step up our efforts to also achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This means investing at a national level in better access to education, better access to health, to equality, to combat racism, to combat inequalities amongst citizens. We can make this happen. We can make this happen if we improve the functioning of the United Nations and if we sufficiently deploy all measures and sufficiently invest at the national level, the regional level, and in all the communities worldwide. I think to conclude that it is time to also work together in monitoring progress, in checking by peer reviews and by evaluation methodologies how the Sustainable Development Goals, how it goes, whether we achieve these goals, whether we achieve midterm goals that we have set. So I would like to plead for an inclusive methodology to review the successes and the progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yves Leterme. Now let's welcome Marcos Troyjo, former Brazilian Deputy Economy Minister and President of the New Development Bank.
Hi, my name is Marcos Troyjo. I'm the President of the New Development Bank. And first of all, I wanted to congratulate CGTN and the United Nations agencies for putting together this very important debate on the 75th anniversary of the UN. The world is better off in a situation where the United Nations exist. This past 3/4 centuries haven't seen wars involving the major international powers, and poverty was alleviated. In a world with the United Nations, countries have been able to make giant strides forward. But the United Nations work also needs to be complemented, especially by institutions such as the New Development Bank, that helps bridge the gap between the needs for infrastructure and the resources that are able to bring about a concrete translation to what the Sustainable Development Goals represent. 2015 was the year in which the Sustainable Development Goals were announced. And 2015 was also the year in which the New Development Bank came into existence. To think that only 5 years ago, the NDB only existed in paper, and now it features 60 projects amounting up to $20 billion is truly remarkable. It shows how these efforts can be complemented and how the entire world can profit from more infrastructure resources being directed to countries, especially in the emerging world. As a matter of fact, the New Development Bank is one of the few international institutions that have made the Sustainable Development Goals become part of its own constitution. And this is one of the reasons why we have been able to focus our resources in water sanitation projects in China, in water supply projects in South Africa, in clean energy projects in Russia, in smart cities projects in Brazil, and in subway projects in India. These sustainable development objectives supported by the NDB make our countries much more prosperous in a sustainable way. And apart from our core focus on infrastructure investment, we have also been able, in a very agile manner, to put together $10 billion for emergency assistance related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The initial slot of resources has been focused on the health-related challenges of the pandemic, and the second phase will be more focused on the economic recovery of our member countries. And at the New Development Bank, we also have our eyes turned to the future. For this next cycle of 10 years, certainly the very concept of sustainable infrastructure will evolve. Things like technology investment, connectivity, health-related infrastructure, all will become more and more an ingredient part of the infrastructure that supports the so-called economy 4.0. And institutions like the New Development Bank have to take a leading role in this new universe. This is made all the more important because in today's world, you have two very important paradoxes. One is there is a huge level of resources available for infrastructure projects, and on the other hand, a dearth of projects that are bankable, viable, and that can be supported. And therefore, multilateral development banks have a very important role to play. And second, we can see that there is a deficit in international cooperation out there. And if there is one area in which the world must come together is based upon the sovereignty of each nation, having international cooperation flourish. So there is a new opportunity for multilateralism that is effective and that creates a very tangible result for societies across the globe. Looking ahead, there are many areas in which the New Development Bank and the United Nations can make a world of a difference. Cross-institutional cooperation, innovative ways of financing development, identifying and putting together those projects that are knowledge-intensive, tech-intensive, talent-intensive. This will all support Sustainable Development Goals. And this is the work we are committed to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marcos Troyjo. Last but not least, Professor Justin Yifu Lin, Dean of the Institute of New Structural Economics at Peking University.
Ladies and gentlemen, poverty eradication is the #1 goal among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Poverty eradication is also the goal of development in every country's modernization drives. In addition, poverty eradication is the foundation for achieving other Sustainable Development Goals. For example, without poverty, people will have sufficient funds to buy food, then there will be no hunger. Without poverty, people will also have sufficient funds for good nutrition intake. In case of illness, they can go to the doctor. They will have good health. China has made a remarkable achievement in the fight for poverty. When China started the reform and opening up in 1978, at that time, 84% of the people in China lived below international poverty lines. In the past 40 years, more than 800 people in China have been left out of poverty. Now, only less than 1% of the population still live below international poverty line. The Chinese government pledges to help them to get out of poverty, so no one will be left behind by the end of this year. And I'd like to share with you the experiences how China can make such a remarkable achievement. From analysis, the best way for poverty elimination is to have inclusive and dynamic economic growth. With inclusive, it can provide a job to the poor people so they can earn income and they can get out of poverty. And with dynamic economic growth, they can raise their income level continuously and from poor to prosperity. And from the Chinese experiences, the way to have inclusive and dynamic economic growth is to grow the economy according to a country's competitive advantages. When China started the transition in the 1970s, China had abundant supply of labor force. So at the time, China developed labor-intensive industries. And by that, it can generate sufficient amount of job opportunity for the poor peoples. And not only so, because that sector is consistent with China's competitive advantages, so the industry can be very competitive. And with that, China can accumulate capitals and upgrade the industry and technologies and to raise the income of the people. But to develop the economies according to a country's competitive advantages is a term only understandable to economists. How can the entrepreneur in the country to develop the industry or the sectors that are consistent with the country's competitive advantages? For that, we need to have two institutions, the competitive market and a facilitation state. The competitive market is essential because only with that, the price signals will be right to guide the choice of the business communities. When a country at the early stage of development, wage rate must be low, and if you have competitive markets, through the market competition, the firms will choose the technology that can use more labor force and go to the industry that can also use the more labor force. And that kind of industry and technology are consistent with the country's competitive advantages. And through the competitiveness, capital will be accumulated. And then gradually, the labor force will turn from abundant to relative scarcity, and the capital will turn from scarcity to relative abundance. And if the price signals can reflect the kind of changes, then the enterprises will upgrade their industry to more capital intensive and adopt more capital intensive technologies. And so competitive market is essential for a country to follow the competitive advantage of their economy in their development. In the process of facilitation state is also essential because the government needs to provide education to the people so they will have the ability to get jobs. At the same time, the government also needs to improve the infrastructure and the business environment to reduce transaction costs so they can turn their competitive advantages to be competitive in domestic and international markets. So the secret of China's success is following the competitive advantages of the Chinese economy with the support of competitive market with the facilitation state. From this understanding, every country will have the hope to eradicate the poverty by the end of 2030s because every country has its own competitive advantages, and with the support of competitive market and facilitation state, they can have an inclusive and a dynamic economic growth. I know other countries will have other experiences, and I hope through this dialogue we can share our experiences and we can join hands to achieve the goal of poverty eradication and other sustainable development goals by the time of 2030. My congratulations for this dialogue and my best wish for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Justin Yifu Lin. The UN 2030 Agenda aspires to eradicate poverty in all its forms worldwide. What does it mean for the uneven development? And what does the future of poverty reduction look like? We're going to ask these questions and more in our panel discussion later. But first, this.
Through challenges and difficulties in 75 years, the United Nations, working for peace and security, aiding members in need. 5 years ago, the start of the pursuit of Sustainable Development Goals. 17 points for a sustainable future. The top goal, to end absolute poverty.
SDGs are everywhere as they should be. And at the current pace, almost 500 million people could remain in extreme poverty by 2030.
10% of the world population still live in extreme poverty, struggling to meet the most basic needs like health, education, and access to water and sanitation. And this year, a bigger struggle, COVID-19. China, with the largest population in the world, seeks to end extreme poverty by the end of 2020.
决战脱贫攻坚，实现第一个100年奋斗目标。
In the past 4 decades, more than 850 million Chinese have escaped the poverty threshold, contributing 70% to global poverty reduction efforts. Poverty eradication, the key to a sustainable future, and a big test for humanity's resolve.
And we are here to discuss the important topic of Sustainable Development Goals and poverty reduction. I'm honored to be joined by panelists, both here in the studio, sitting with us in Beijing, and joining us online from all over the world. First of all, in our studio, Ambassador James Kimonio, who is the Rwanda ambassador to China. Mr. Ambassador, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Beate Trankman, UNDP China resident representative. Ms. Trankman. Ms. Zhang Linxiu, Director of the UN Environment Program International Ecosystem Management Partnership. Thank you. Claire Pearson, Chairwoman of the China-Britain Belt and Road Chamber of Commerce. Good to see you. Also joining us online, strong panelists from different parts of the world. Michael Kramer, American development economist and Nobel laureate. Good to see you, Professor. Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor at Columbia University, Director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you.
Vladimir Yakunin, co-founder and chairman of the supervisory board at the Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute. Good to see you, Mr. Yakunin.
Thank you, Shane.
Last but certainly not least, from Italy, Mica Gracci, former Undersecretary of State at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. Professor, good to see you. Meanwhile, we're on to welcome our audience sitting in our studio here and joining us online on the big screen from all over the world. Welcome, a big welcome to all of you. We talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We don't have the time to go through all of them, but Ms. Trankman is coming from the United Nations Development Program. Your job is to work on development. Tell us how it works, these goals, and how it will help us to reduce poverty.
Well, thank you for having me, Tianwei. It's a great pleasure. And indeed, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were agreed by world leaders in 2015, and they are the goals to end poverty, reduce inequality, and save our planet for future generations to come by 2030. So they are our roadmap in development, if you like, promoting development in all countries. And I think we have seen actually good progress on the MDGs and the SDGs over the last few decades. But I think what we're also seeing, and that is important for me as a development professional, is that progress is slowing. We had lifted, as a world community, 1 billion people out of poverty over the last 4 decades. But now we're seeing progress slowing, and our projections, for example, on poverty, the goal number 1 that you highlighted, are that by 2030, we will have 6% of the world population remaining in extreme poverty. So we will miss the goal of 0 poverty by 2030. We're also seeing the number of hungry people increasing in the world. We are at 800 million people going hungry, and this number jumped by 25% between 2014 and 2018. And I think the worrisome bit is that this was before the pandemic, before COVID-19. So now you add the impact of the pandemic, and our projections are showing that in 2020, there's likely to be between 70 and 100 million people being pushed back into extreme poverty. As UNDP, we're estimating that for the first time in 30 years, the Human Development Index, which measures progress in 3 dimensions, incomes, health, and education, will regress globally for the first time in 30 years. And I think what we're seeing in the economies is that this double shock on supply and demand side is also making those who were secure previously, making them vulnerable. And I'm talking in particular about informal sector workers who constitute half of global jobs. They've seen a decrease in their income in the first 2 months of 60%.
You have set a picture for us, which I'm afraid is not that optimistic a picture. as a result of particularly COVID-19. Now, Professor Sachs, you've been working as top advisors to the UN Secretary General for years. Tell me about your realistic assessment of our situation right now, particularly regarding poverty reduction.
Well, of course, as we've just been hearing, COVID-19 is a huge setback. It's disrupted the world economy very seriously. It has hit the poor exceptionally hard because of disruption of trade, disruption of tourism, disruption of remittance income, all of the internal dislocations that are taking place in most of the world as the virus spreads, the direct impact on health and disease. It's a bad situation right now, but it's compounded by the failures of leadership, especially the United States, which has pulled out of the World Health Organization at the peak of the pandemic, absurd, by the insufficiencies of international finance structures to really be in line with the sustainable development goals. Rich countries don't do enough. Rich people don't pay enough taxes. Rich sectors like the tech sector don't pay enough taxes. So we don't have the public revenues even to face humanitarian crises, much less to finance longer-term public services. And we're not adequately directing the actual large amount of global savings potential to the high productive investments, whether in people or in physical infrastructure or in business capital. Mm-hmm. So recycling the savings to the high return investments is crucial. That's partly a government function. It's partly a private function. Initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative can make a big contribution by focusing saving on high return, high social return investments.
I see.
But to do all of this, we need global cooperation, which we don't have right now, because this is not the time for trade wars or for belligerency against the multilateral system. And we need to overcome the pandemic as the first order of priority, because as long as there is rampant spread of this disease, our trade and finance and politics are going to be highly disrupted.
Probably that's what the development experts would say. There will be, and there is, a laundry list of challenges. But Professor Creamer, if I could put a question of choice in front of you, what would be the solution? Would that be the global cooperation, as Ms. Trunkman and Professor Sachs have clearly illustrated, or would that be individual countries trying to make their cases work so that eventually, altogether, there will be a better picture? What choice would you do?
Well, right now, the biggest challenge the world is facing, let me focus on the short term, the immediate. The biggest challenge the world is facing is clearly the COVID-19 epidemic. The IMF estimates that we're losing, or the World Bank estimates we're losing $500 billion every month that the epidemic continues. The ultimate solution to the epidemic is going to be a vaccine. If you think about the technological characteristics of a vaccine, once we develop a vaccine, it should be usable around the world. So what we need to do, and there are a variety of ways that could be done, is to invest heavily in developing such a vaccine. That could be through a single coordinated international effort, or it could be through individual national efforts in a context where countries can make arrangements to invest in vaccines that are produced in other countries. Each country needs to invest either individually or through a multilateral system in a whole set of vaccines, a whole portfolio of vaccines, in order to ensure that once a vaccine is available, they can benefit from it.
I see. It seems that Professor Creamer is pointing to a third solution, which is to develop a vaccine and to use a vaccine worldwide. Of course, that is addressing directly to the issue of COVID-19. But for the bigger issue of poverty reduction, this is only the start for a crisis management. There are bigger ones and bigger things that we have to handle as we go along if we could deal with COVID-19 for now. Ms. Pearson, poverty reduction is not a slogan. It has to be done every day through everything that we are trying to achieve. I know you've been living in China. You've also been traveling in Africa when you were young, and then living in Europe. You've seen different parts of the world, how they are dealing with poverty reduction. Tell me more about immediate reaction to what they have to say earlier.
Well, Tianwei, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. This is the most important topic. Companies and countries understand that, or they don't. And if they don't really have a future in the multilateral sphere. You say I've lived in different countries. Yes, I have, but the people's desires are no different. One's geography should not determine their destiny. You say we can call you way. And what I'm interested in is how you create a way to the table for people whose voices isn't being represented. And what I've noticed during the COVID epidemic, different voices have come to the fore. No longer is the most important person in your government the head of the Ministry of Defense. It's the head of the Ministry of Disease Control. We're fighting an invisible enemy. When one person in the world has COVID, we all potentially have COVID. I was in Malaysia when it broke out with a client from Guangzhou selling drones to do agricultural spraying. We were on FaceTime, WeChat to his family in Wuhan, watching them in lockdown on New Year Day. Not much fun. Flew straight back to China. What did he do in Guangzhou? He adapted his drone to spray ambulances, to clean the area. China is a highly adaptive society. I've been at work for the last 9 months every day in my office because China has created a way for me to come to the table to deal with multilateral voices like this and to understand the future of a survival economy which we are in globally.
I love the example you give about poverty reduction, how it should be done on a daily basis. Mr. Ambassador, coming from Rwanda, you are here living in China. I know your country and China has been working together on health and education, exactly some of the points Claire mentioned. Could you help us to understand what are some of the things that our panelists who are joining us from all over the world, as well as our audience, they should take note of?
Thank you very much, Wei, for the opportunity. I want to thank the panelists who just spoke. And let me say that pre-COVID-19 period, Rwanda was considered among the top 10 fastest growing economies. And that's not about the figures of growth of 8%, and by the third quarter of 2019, we were growing at 11.9%. It's not about those numbers. It's in fact about the number of people who are helped to leave the poverty level. And we can see the numbers in Rwanda. We were able to bring down the poverty levels from 60% all the way down to 30%, and the extreme poverty from 40 to 16%. And I want to attribute this to the visionary leadership and effective government or national institutions. We'll talk about multilateralism and the role of multilateral institutions like the UN and its agencies, and bilateral cooperation between countries, the example you just gave between Rwanda and China, and the national institutions. I think we need to focus mainly on building the strong national institutions and look at homegrown solutions like the experience we have in Rwanda and China. But talking about China-Rwanda cooperation, precisely because of the national priorities that are geared towards addressing the challenges of poverty to our people, including education, health, and opportunity. China, through our cooperation, bilateral cooperation, but also under the framework where China cooperates with the African continent, China supports a number of programs that supports people to leave poverty. One being health by constructing hospitals, but also providing other services related to the sector. Number two, in the area of education, in the context of supporting Rwanda as a country that's trying to build a knowledge-based economy, China also contributes to education. Another area that I want to talk about when it comes to poverty reduction, access to potable water, drinking water is very critical. And as we speak today, China is doing about 200 wells in Rwanda, supporting rural population to have access to water. I can also talk about mining area. Mining sector is normally considered to be an economic sector. But remember, in some of our countries, mining has always been artisanry. It's being done today by ordinary people who toil every single day to make a few cents. But when you bring in technology, which China is doing today, it means you are going to make it commercial and increase the incomes for the people who are otherwise under poverty line.
I see. It seems that you're trying to say there are several areas that one has to address when it comes to poverty reduction. Education, basic health care, and even infrastructure in this regard, the water system, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Will that be the key? May I ask, Professor Ghiolacci, you're based in Italy. I'm sure you have your different observations.
Indeed, I should tell you that in the previous government, we did flirt with the idea of universal basic income in Italy. We tried to introduce it. It was a mixed success. I'm very honest about it. For two reasons. One was to reintroduce young people into the workforce. But a large part of it was actually aimed at poverty alleviation in Italy, where about 10% of the population, according to some official statistics, live below the poverty line. So we are looking at a G7 country that maybe for reasons that other people in the panel are more expert than I to understand, maybe globalization, surely bad management on the side of government, have led to a very wide disparity and not a relative, but an absolute decline in the standard of living. In my analysis, suggests that 70% of Italians are worse off now than they were 30 years ago. And this has given us, let's say, the initial framework to start to implement that universal basic income. But this is not just about Italy. We know that the European Union and the rest of other European countries will suffer between -5, -10, -13% drop this year. So that will not only bring the overall level down, but will increase this disparity, because within that -13 that Italy will probably do, and the rest of Europe will look at -8, -9, there will be some industries and some people that will do a small plus, and some will do -20, -30. So we are really facing with a major challenges for which, I have to say, having worked in government, we are not really equipped. And this is why I'm trying, as my next task, is to bring research academia back at the table of the Prime Minister's office, because we need to know, we need to understand the latest on research, we need to understand what policy can be implemented, because politicians look at elections, while academics have, of course, a more long-term view. And I want to bridge those two worlds, the short-term and long-term view, to try to find solutions that are really needed now, not just in developing countries, but really even in Europe.
What about for Russia? Mr. Yakunin, you're joining us. The other guests have been talking about solutions, and they were particularly emphasized on implementation of solutions and plans. In Russia's case, and from your perspective, poverty reduction and the overall sustainable agenda.
Listen, I don't think that Russia differs very much from the entire world, despite all the specifics of our community and our development, specifically now during the pandemic, we are hurt as much as everybody else. This is one thing. On the other thing, you know, of course, it is extremely difficult that through all the periods since the dissolvement of the Soviet Union, that we are trying to establish new institutions, and so far, you know, still we have a way to go for the settlement. On the other hand, I should see that it is not just the ability or the the wealth of the particular country when we are talking about the helping of the other regions and the other countries. It does not matter we are talking about Russia, we are talking Italy, we are talking United States of America. You know, it is absolutely obvious, and I follow latest interview of Professor Sachs when he was saying that the poor government, it is not the reason for the country to be poor, it's vice versa. Sometimes because of the absence of the resources, the governance is not at a high level. Therefore, I completely agree with Professor Kramer that, you know, when we are fighting, for example, a pandemic, we should unite the efforts of entire international community. It is not possible for just one country to settle all the issues of the world, and pandemic is the worldwide issue. Therefore, you know, we are in Russia, and that is not only Russian position, I'm talking on behalf of DOC also, it is absolutely necessary, you know, to enforce, to provide the possibility for international organizations to help those in fighting of poverty and in fighting of coronavirus consequences. And I suppose here we have a lot to do together, and any attempt to, you know, disintegrate the world further will create more challenges and will create more risks. So, you know, this pandemic is not just something, you know, unique, the only thing we are facing. Who knows what we will face in the future? And because of that, it is our strong position at DOC and in Russia that we should enforce international organizations. We should use international cooperation to fight poverty. For example, you know, some experts are saying now that in Africa, you know, last year there were like 140 million, you know, people starving from hunger. And this year, they predict the figure double. So it is not only wishful thinking, we would like to help. We need to organize this help. We need to organize our mutual cooperation. We should put aside all the differences of ideologies or something like that. It is our task as being part of humanity.
Okay. Well, it seems that our picture is getting ever clearer. For the solution, we do have the basic education, basic healthcare, and basic infrastructure that is there to help. Wherever they are being established and well implemented in countries, they're going to work. However, on the other hand, there is a big issue of governance, whether it is international cooperation, whether it is, in fact, helping with governance within the country. Let me ask you, Ms. Zhang, you'll be listening to your colleagues. I know you have been personally participating in various poverty reduction programs in China and beyond through UNEP. Tell me more about, among all of these things your colleagues mentioned, which one you think and you are experienced that are really working?
Well, thank you very much, Wei. And I think I agree with most of the points that that poverty alleviation has many dimensions. But I think there are one nature I wanted to say, because SDGs has 17 goals, 169 targets. The key is all the goals and targets are interconnected. Whatever else you pick it up, it contributes to poverty alleviation. So in my experiences, I used to be working in the Chinese Academy of Sciences before I joined UNEP as a development economist working on poverty alleviation. So one area I was picking up is, because lots of people working on invest in kind of infrastructure and services and employment or somehow, I pick it up at early childhood education. Because you can alleviate poverty today, but if you want to sustain the results, you need to make sure there's no intergenerational poverty trap. What do? You start from the very beginning. First 1,000 days is the most crucial stage for the babies who develop their cognitive skills and the social emotions, and also they are kind of other kind of mobility, big mobility. So But this is an area a lot of developing countries has not paid attention. When we went to the rural areas, a lot of people were having cognitive development delay in babies in the countryside. They're not born kind of stupid. It's just because if you want to develop a cognitive skill, you have genes matters, but nutrition also matters, and a kind of parenting environment matters. But not many people paying attention to that. In the urban areas, you have parenting centers, you have early childhood development center. But in the rural areas, first, the commercial organization don't go because it's not profitable.
Right. So how did it work?
So it worked. Of course, it worked. We traced all the babies when they were in these programs or not in the program. We used the testing, like Bailey scale testing. We found that the babies who had this training or the parents knows how to play with their babies, they grow much faster in terms of all the kind of dimensional kind of scales you wanted to measure as a child. But Lancet had a special issue called investing in early childhood would result in much higher returns in the future because you don't want the poor population ending into a poverty trap.
I'm sure what you have just said echo with Professor Creamer, because Professor Creamer won the Nobel Prize for last year as a result of the earlier trials he's been trying to do in Africa regarding early education. We're talking about this not as the solution, but rather one of those solutions. Professor Creamer.
Yes, I very much agree. Just to follow up on the previous comments and to bring home this intergenerational point. There's a program in Jamaica. This involved intervention for growth-stunted toddlers with weekly visits by community health workers who provided some of the stimulation that we were just hearing about. When this was in 1986, the original paper was done. 22 years later, it was found that the children who received this program earned 25% more. So I think that's an example of the types of gains, huge economic gains, very high rates of return that one can achieve.
There were some dewormed programs going on, both in the developed world and in the developing world, just as what you have
He
just
was talking
mentioned.
about home visits, like teaching the parents how to play with their babies. So with intervention, without intervention, you trace their lifetime where their school attendance were higher, and their employment were much more secure, their income was higher, and their health was better.
Having said that, though, we are mainly talking about solutions. There are immediate ones, immediate tools that all of you mentioned, education, healthcare, even vaccines for the immediate danger. But there are also governance issues. Ms. Schrankman, you early talk about the pandemic's impact on poverty reduction and how is it likely to delay our goal. Already, we're not likely to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 because of COVID-19. So in terms of what we can do, vaccine, it is what we are doing. But what about governance? You're coming from the UN. You should know more about the governance and the international governance. How does it work so far?
So, I think that there's a couple of things I would say. One is that the pandemic, what it has done is it has shown the limelight on existing vulnerabilities that we have in our societies, right? Poverty, inequality, environmental damage, the biggest challenge of them all, climate change, right? We only have one planet. People live of the land, of the earth, of water. You have 40–50% of global employment that actually depends on intact ecosystems. So what the pandemic has done, it has shown the limelight on these vulnerabilities. But I think it has also proven another case, which is basically that everything is connected with everything. And no one will be safe until everyone is safe. Meaning that we won't solve any of these problems if we don't work together. And that's exactly what the United Nations stands for, right? Because the United Nations is the only all-encompassing multilateral organization in the world. And so 75 years into our existence, we're celebrating 75 years today, we're more relevant than ever. Yes, there are challenges, but especially in terms of political divides in the Security Council. But I think we see multilateralism actually working on the ground every day. And I give you one example, a pandemic-related example. Since the outbreak as the UN, we have done, with the development system of the UN, 113 socioeconomic impact assessments on the ground, country by country, understanding where the challenge is, where does it hurt, where are the solutions, where do we need to put the money, multilateral organizations. And we're now developing, on the basis of that, socio-economic response plans. They will differ from country to country. I think a big one is what I was saying before, how important the informal sector is, and protecting workers in the informal sector, expanding our social security systems so that people are covered for these type of shocks. But the other one is protecting our environments, because if we keep living off the earth the way we're doing now, and we're not reining in climate change, we're in for more pandemics.
Well, some would say, Ms. Trankman, these are common sense. But how come? People just don't understand common sense. Maybe I should put that question to Professor Sachs, because he has been doing research about international governance and has been constant headache of it. So, Professor Sachs, you might want to unveil the mystery for us. Why? And why not?
Well, I think it's a very good question. But basically, rich and powerful people don't believe that we're all in this together. They believe that they are protected, that they can go off to their islands, or they can live online. And if poor people die, that's just tough luck. And that, unfortunately, is an ideology very much in my own country, in the United States, which is a kind of repulsive ideology. But it is a belief that we don't have to save the world to save ourselves. If we're rich, powerful, that's good enough. And I think that that really is one half of the story, which is that there is two kinds of views. One is that we are all human beings, and we should all have these benefits that we're talking about, or you're on your own. And I personally believe in the we're all together view of this. The second point that I would mention, though, is the one that Vladimir Yakunin mentioned. He used a very important word. He said, we need to get organized. This is professional management that we need. He's a great manager. He ran a large system of railroads. You know, if you just talk, but you don't manage, I don't think the trains run also. So in this sense, I'm very impressed, for example. There hasn't been a vaccine yet, but China got the epidemic completely under control. A number of other countries brought the epidemic completely under control. They used what are called non-pharmaceutical interventions. Of course, a vaccine we all want and need to cooperate, as Michael Kramer said, to invest in and deliver. But even before that, good professional organization is what's required. In my country, we have a completely incompetent government in addition to a nasty government. So we've had 190,000 deaths. These are unnecessary. And so a big part of development is competence, that you have plans, that you're organized, that you can manage, and you can deliver. So I think it's a combination of ethics and management. The ethics is the ethics that we are all in this together. I believe that's the decent human ethics. I believe it's also true, but it's not the prevailing ethics among powerful people. And second is the quality of management, because development is a management process. And China's 45 years of, even more now, of very dramatic, successful development is a management success to an important extent also, because making coherent investments in education, in people, in infrastructure requires very sound engineering and management. So I would put both of these on the table for us.
Thank you for your advice. Certainly, it's not enough just to talk about it, but to have a plan, to implement a plan, to have a way of implementing the plan, bring the society together with you. That will be the solution. I know, sir, you will be joining us in some future occasions. For now, I want to thank you, sir. And having said that, though, let me come back to our studio discussion. Mr. Ambassador, about implementation. Some say in different developing and developed world, there are different capabilities of implementation. But what Professor Sachs just pointed out, it seems that there are at least some exceptions. To you, how much will governance be able to catch up to the tasks that all our guests have been illustrating?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think by answering your question, I will share our humble experience in terms of executing the programs that have made difference, given the fact that this is the country that started from the very low base after the genocide that happened in 1994. Number one, and very critical, is to involve the people who are affected by some of these challenges. When you talk about poverty, how do I help people to get out of poverty with the involvement? And you have seen that working because people own the program. The sense of ownership is very, very critical. But of course, at national level, you need the connected national institutions that are able to deliver on the strategic plan that you have to be able to address those challenges. And without any doubt, having colleagues here from the UN system, we have worked together in so many areas. And as it's just been mentioned, even after the COVID-19, we sat together with the United Nations to look at how we reshape our approach on dealing with some of these challenges. We have our national strategic plan for transformation, which has a number of pillars. One of them, which is key, is human development, which includes health and education. How do we work together with the UN system and other partners, civil society and private sector, to address some of these challenges? On the issue of climate change and environmental protection, how do we work with the agencies that are qualified? As you just heard, they have tons of data and information on how some of these issues can be addressed. So I think national institutions involving beneficiaries and working together with the rest of the world through multinational organizations, I think that would be very critical and a breakthrough to addressing some of these challenges.
Ms. Trenkman, very briefly from you, do you think now the multilateral platforms, including international organizations like the United Nations, could be up for the job given the political divide? I'm just pointing to a reality we all face today.
Yeah, no, I think, as I said, I think we are up for the job because, as the ambassador was also saying, at the ground level, the multinational system and the multilateral system is working. We're working in our countries, supporting the realization of national development visions. And I think what you also see, despite some of the blockages, in the UN Security Council or on, certain countries withdrawing from international commitments, right? A lot of the action is actually shifting to local governments, realizing, for example, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And you have a lot of work that is being done there at the city level, at the local government level. But I think the point is again, these issues, poverty, climate change, pandemics, are global issues. They transcend boundaries, and therefore they can only be addressed through rules-based international.
And global issues act locally, certain that help. What about in China? You've been here in China several rounds, very young, earlier in the days, working on HIV/AIDS, and now coming back, working on development. What about your witness and experience with China in terms of development, in terms of poverty reduction?
Yeah, I think, my experience, having worked on HIV in the early 2000s and coming back now, is sort of seeing the success of China's poverty reduction efforts. Because the HIV pandemic in the end 90s, early 2000s was a poverty-driven pandemic. I think in nowadays China, this would be completely unthinkable, right? China has lifted 750 million people out of poverty. That's 3/4 of the world's population that was lifted out of poverty. How have they done it? I think it's 3 main ingredients, actually. So it's a bottom-up, very targeted approach to poverty reduction that looked at, you know, what is the situation on the ground, household by household? Where are the poor? What do they need? What do they lack? What do they need? Then devising implementation strategies that at county and household level that looked at what can they sell, how can they make a living, what's the comparative advantage, and then monitor that over time to make sure it remains on track. Plus, of course, sustained commitment in terms of investment of resources and human resources. And that's why China is heading towards eradicating extreme rural poverty.
A lot of personal stories, I guess, involved in all of this. And Professor Carracci, I know before you serve as the Undersecretary for State in Italy, you also work here in China for years. You know much of the China stories in terms of poverty reduction. Tell me more of your observations, and how do you think they could be shared and compare notes with the others?
I have been lucky enough to see in the 10 years I've lived in China, the number of poor people going down, 750, 800 million people in the last few decades. In addition to the targeted poverty program, which is very successful, I think the model has also been based on a program to migrate from rural areas to urban areas.
Mr. Yakunin, your observations of poverty reduction experiences in various countries, China included.
Listen, speaking about China experience, you know, I'm visiting China very frequently, as you know, and I have a lot of friends among, you know, some political figures, among economists and scholars, and I suppose we can observe here that China actually have had a special plan for reduction of poverty. And that, whatever you like, you can use it, the title, roadmap, if you don't like, you know, the plan, but that was a specific activity targeting reduction of poverty. And that's it. To obtain the target, firstly, one should have the target, then should estimate the necessary resources, allocate people to be responsible for reaching those targets, and then only something can be done. It cannot be done like that. You know, I don't want to have, you know, anybody, poor in this particular country. I would like also to draw your attention to the fact that when we are talking about the recent development and activity in fighting poverty, in the history of latest history of mankind, we had only two periods when inequality was somewhat lessening. The first was after 1917 revolution in Russia, and the second was right after the World War II. After the World War II, this difference between the rich and poor was only rising, and now it is reaching some kind of maximum. So there is something wrong with the existing model, with the existing system. And it is, of course, for professionals to understand what are the major problems with that. You know, everyone is talking about necessity to fight poverty, but why in China you reached somewhat the target, maybe not fully, I suppose it is not fully, but still reached. Why, on the other hand, in other different countries, despite all the efforts of developed countries, so to say, to help to get people out of the poverty, the result is not that impressive. And, you know, I was visiting many conferences and very often observed or heard such statement as, we developed countries, we need to help developing world. We need to create a plan how to help developed world, undeveloped world. And then one lady from Africa took the stage and she asked, why you are talking that you should prepare something, you know, for developing world? Why should you not say that we should ask what we should do? And why not to create some common institute, some common instruments, you know, to fight the poverty? Why don't you just think that possibly you don't know exactly what needed to be done? And I suppose this is a point.
Great point. All you need to do is ask, right? In a way. Claire, you've been nodding your head. I think Mr. Yakunin is pointing to a very important question in terms of international cooperation. Don't talk down as to what others should do, but rather really observe and listen.
Tianwei, I love it. That's your job, asking difficult questions. And that is the privilege of living in Beijing. You only need two things to solve poverty alleviation: diversity, delivery. And I just looked down this panel, and honestly, Rwanda is my favorite role model country for having 50% women in the government. And there are opportunities to learn here. This morning, I spent half an hour on the phone deciding between a multicultural group. Are we going to go on Zoom? Are we going to go on Tencent meeting? It's the delivery, the execution. It matters what time zone you're in. It matters what food you have after the meeting. It matters what language goes first. And it matters that you are polite and respect the people. And this is what I've learned working in a Chinese firm. I'm the only foreigner. My Chinese boss gives a lot of money to education. I asked him last night for some clever quotes today. Do you know what he said? Confucius says, education breeds confidence. Confidence breeds peace. Confidence, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Basically, education is the most important SDG. Why? He said Hangzhou today would be known for selling silk to Shanghai if we'd just built the railway. But because China focused on education, Hangzhou today is known for NASDAQ-listed Alibaba. Education changes generations, infrastructure enriches a province.
Professor Kramer, I want to have you to say something also on top of what everybody has been talking from their own perspectives. As a development economist, I'm sure you also have your own personal input and anecdotes in this regard.
Sure. Let me pick up on this point that we don't know everything, which I think is a really important point. There's a real tendency sometimes in the development field to assume that we have all the solutions and to go ahead and implement them. And it is important to act, but sometimes we're wrong. And I think one of the things you asked for a personal anecdote. So I spent time teaching secondary school in Kenya after I graduated from university, before I went to graduate school. And I then went back on vacation after I got my first job at MIT, and I met a friend of mine who was working for an NGO, and what I had suggested they do was that they try different approaches in different schools and see what worked. And some of the things that, having been a teacher, that I thought were going to work, even just providing basic textbooks, they didn't necessarily have such a big impact. And there were reasons. It's not that textbooks are bad. It was something about those textbooks. And people were earlier talking about why China's been so successful in addressing poverty. And I agree with everything that was mentioned, the poverty programs, the migration, the macroeconomic growth. But one element of why China's been successful is China has conducted a wide variety of policy experiments at local levels, and they've seen what worked, and then they've scaled those up nationally. They haven't been done as randomized trials, but they have experimented, and they have used that in formulating policy. And I think the world needs more of that.
Well, that's probably all the questions that I have in mind, but I'm sure our audience here in the studio and joining us online from all over the world, they have more challenging questions for all of you. Anyone who have a question, you can raise your hand and ask those questions. Yes, please.
My name is Una Ahmed Khan. I work at Tsinghua University, and I feel like two things came up in today's panel. Number one, we talk about the fact that we are together. We have to think about the world in a collective way. One country's failure, one country's suffering affects us all. And number two, we talk about the fact that we don't have to talk down at countries. We don't have to tell them how to develop, how to improve. So don't you think there's a bit of a conflict that when we see one country not performing well, if some countries are not able to develop, not able to make the right choices, how do we propose, how do we move forward and help them develop in a way that can be fruitful for regional cooperation?
How to not leaving behind, but at the same time respect. Professor Creamer, very briefly.
Yeah, if we look at programs like graduation programs or conditional cash transfer programs that put resources in the hands of poor people, we actually, and many of these have been evaluated with randomized trials, we see quite impressive effects. And in fact, in some cases, we see sustained reductions in poverty from what are called graduation programs that provide a basic asset to enhance household productivity, like livestock, for example, some training and some income support. So I think that approach can both involve providing resources, but also giving people dignity and choice in their lives.
Okay, and further question, please.
Thank you. My name is Zhang Huidong. I come from International Poverty Reduction Center in China. My question is how to enhance the poor households' productivity to let them participate in the economic growth progress and finally get out of poverty trap.
On that, may I have Professor Garachi possibly to share something with us?
I think the role of the government and the institution, I think, is very strong in getting the whole family, household, and even the local community involved. And from my experience in looking at the examples of China and other parts of the world is that the success of China has also been based on the things that we were talking about before, but also on the strong presence of the government. In the economic field, we try to find maybe now a new line between the state and the market, given the success and failures of certain economic models. And I think the same question needs to be addressed in the case of poverty alleviation. Where is the line between the role of the government and the private? So we do have NGOs around the world. We do not have so many in China. And the reason is because in order to, like you asked in a way, how do we involve everyone? How do we involve at the local level? The effort must be evenly spread. And that's why a centralized approach may target where it's mostly needed without creating imbalances that I've witnessed. I've seen, for example, some areas develop faster than others, some villages more advanced than others. And these sometimes does create what we call it, the neighbor's income, a little bit of a competition that sometimes is good, but sometimes it creates a sense of not belonging. And that's why an overall umbrella blanket approach may limit this disparity, because we also have to worry about the disparity in bringing some cohorts out, or some families, some villages out of poverty while leaving some others behind. And this is a little bit the risk I've seen in countries outside of China, because China has been successful in its own country, and of course it's relatively easy, although it's been a massive result.
I see.
But when we try to export this model in other countries, we have to deal with 50 countries in Europe, maybe the ambassador from Rwanda can chip in. It's very difficult because maybe we do have misalignment of interest, institutional difficulties, and like Professor Sachs Jeffrey was saying before, some rich people, even in local communities, may not have in their own interest to develop the rest of the country. So we need to face the reality, and this is really the practical aspect of it.
how to bring the vitality of the society out, not just top-down approach, but also bottom-up approach, while looking at the diversities of situations in the society. Thank you so much. We've been hearing a lot of questions coming from our here audience in the studio, but what about through online? Anyone, you can raise your hand and you can go ahead.
I'm the president of China EU, and we promote a cooperation in particular in the digital and high-tech sector. And we believe that this sector can give a big contribution, important contribution, in order to eradicate the poverty. We know there are many studies which are clearly linked low income with low level of technology adoption. And we know that thanks to, if we remove the digital divide, we will reduce also the poverty. And last but not least, we know when we speak about growth, because if we want people to live better, have a higher income, we need growth. And we know the importance of digital as an engine in order to allow countries to be more competitive. And this will be even more important with new networks like 5G, and the digital divide will broaden. So I would like to ask to all the panelists or whatever would like to answer how they see this issue and what they think should be done and could be done in order to give much more attention and focus on these aspects.
The digital divide, a question. Professor Creamer, I know you work on digital divide a lot with concrete examples. And Mr. Yakunin, I also want you to address that question if you can.
You know, many farmers, we're all using technology to adapt to COVID. We're doing that right now. You know, just as high-income people can do this, you know, now when farmers have cell phones, it's possible to reach farmers and provide them scientific information on weather, on pest outbreaks, on soil characteristics that they can use in making their farming decisions. So just to come to this environmental point, you know, one problem is that some farmers are not using certain inputs that could make them more productive. But the opposite problem is that farmers are using too much of other inputs that creates environmental problems. Actually, providing information can address both problems simultaneously, delivering both economic and environmental benefits. And we've seen this in many countries around the world. I've worked with a number of governments that are putting in digital agricultural extension programs, and we've evaluated them carefully, and we've seen these are very productive investments in terms of increasing appropriate use of inputs and increasing yields.
I see.
So this is an example where a form of agricultural extension that doesn't require person-to-person contact and therefore is appropriate for COVID is also laying the groundwork for an improved form of agricultural extension for poverty reduction in the long term.
Mr. Yakunin, briefly.
Very briefly, you know, nowadays the digital inequality is of high level of discussion among experts and scientists. This is absolutely true approach, and I suppose it cannot be just wishful thinking about the equality in this sphere. My opinion is that, you know, the joint efforts of international institutions should be introduced to provide the developing world with the possibility to use the digitalization fruits in their development. You know, here it is not possible to consider that the free competition can provide those societies with equality in digital sphere. It has some very different connotation, quite vice versa. It's some kind of, you know, digital jail which they can find themselves in.
Further questions coming from anyone? Okay, please, this lady.
I'm from China Agricultural University. I will be very brief. My question goes to Mr. Ambassador. Two strategies in development work. One is welfare strategy. And Ms. Troyjo emphasized the importance of welfare strategy, and Mr. Ambassador emphasized the strategy for economic independence because you emphasize the strong sense of ownership. So I'm wondering, which approach is more effective on the ground?
The one that was directed to me about welfare vis-a-vis economic independence. I think, as it was just mentioned, it's not either or. We do both. By the way, Rwanda is ranked among the top countries in the area of ease of doing business, which means we have attracted a lot of private capital, which creates opportunities for people who have no opportunity, people who have no jobs.
Right.
And in the next 5 years, we are planning to create 1.5 million jobs every year, and that's going to be created by the private sector, because precisely we have been able to create a conducive business environment for private sector to participate in that process. On the welfare, Rwanda also is ranked among the countries that are doing well in terms of providing very effective safety nets.
Okay.
In terms of direct support to vulnerable families, cash transfers, cash for work, 1 cow per poor family, which helps people to generate income. So there are programs that are really considered to be under the welfare category, but also in terms of attracting private investment. Rwanda has created that environment that has attracted millions of dollars in different sectors.
We can
mining,
see you're a
agriculture.
very proud ambassador for your country sitting right here, trying to promote how your country has been trying to work every step of the way to solve some of the problems. I'm sure they're of great reference. We have further questions. Okay, please.
All right, my name is Sandrine Douimana. I come from Burundi. I work for China Africa Business Council, which is a chamber that promotes investment, specifically on the private sector. And my question is actually related to the private sector's role under this theme of poverty reduction, because I feel like we've spoken about governance, we've spoken about multilateral organizations coming together. Any successes, any successful stories that have happened yet? I know the UNDP has done a lot of efforts to get the private sector on board. Are there any good stories? Are there challenges? What challenges are we facing? And what insights are there to get the private person on board?
Before we go, we let every one of them to say very briefly an example they have witnessed in terms of poverty reduction. I think Mr. Ambassador already said it about his own country, which is quite an example. Ms. Pearson.
The one I really enjoy working with is Career Trek. So it's kids from West China, Gansu, Hunan, coming to Shanghai, 15 at a time. We just have a lot of fun. We go to the Science Museum, because I do really think that the real talent of China is often locked up in the West, and it needs to be exposed to the opportunity on the Eastern Seaboard. I love that program. The businesses gain as much from it as do the people who take part. Because how do you do business today? You have to build trust, cat for cat, dog for dog. The people who volunteer in the philanthropy sector are the people you trust to transact with.
Through that children's program, you actually
they're the
have
naughty,
got to
disruptive teenagers. I love them. You know, that age where they haven't had a lid put on their talent. They haven't been told they're not good enough. They've not been they don't know they're not invited to the table. They don't know they don't have a voice in a multilateral institution. They have all the ability. Those girls inspire me. They get up early. They do their homework. They speak great English. They're bilingual, and they deserve a job in a multinational. And I love the Chinese businessman who pays for that. Chinese philanthropy is huge, but modest. They don't advertise themselves. They pragmatically deliver solutions on the ground, difference between East and West.
Your example.
My
Briefly,
example is a project where we're working with rural women, empowering women to increase their economic resilience by helping them to link up to the market. They use smartphone to link to the market, but at the same time, help them to do agro-biodiversity conservation that's also build up resilience. When this year around, when the pandemic happened, all the transportation were blocked, and local farmers, especially ladies, were able to use the seeds they stored and to produce. When others are locked at home, they are in the field sowing their plants. So that's a typical example of increase the resilience towards all kind of crises. But empowering women. Women are the major players in the countryside, especially in the mountain areas where for agriculture and food consumption, biodiversity conservation.
Thank you. Mr. Trankman, briefly, please.
So since we are in China, let me pick a Chinese example. One of very interesting programs that we've done was working with farmers
in remote regions and working with them on ecological farming and how to bring produce to markets. And we did something that we oftentimes do. We develop basically the sort of the model, the proving the case with local government, farmers, beneficiary communities, national government, etc., and then take it to scale. And that was a program that has run over a number of years, then reaching 30 provinces in China, 1 million farmers benefiting per year, and their revenues increased by 10% on average.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these stories and also ideas about poverty reduction, not only here in the studio, but also joining us online. As all of you indicated, we are still having tremendous challenges ahead. However, with global cooperation and multilateral actions, we are working toward a better and more sustainable future. On behalf of our team and our organizers for this event, I want to thank you, and also our audience here in the studio and joining us online from all over the world. We hope we'll be able to be together for a shared future. And please stay tuned. We'll have 2 other panels on topics: poverty and the pandemic and the rising Africa. See you soon.